We know that the Montreal Canadiens came into the 2026 NHL Entry Draft with three obvious needs. They needed more down the middle, they needed help on the right side of their defense, and they needed to keep adding the blend of size, skill, competitiveness, and edge that makes a team harder to play against when the games get tighter. So after 8 selections, what exactly do you think they accomplished? They didn't solve everything. Let's be very clear about that. But they did attack two major organizational needs with purpose. They added size and they added bite. They added two right shot defensemen and multiple wingers who could skate, pressure, finish checks, and potentially become hard playoff style depth pieces. And with Gleb Pugachyov at the top of that class, they made a very clear statement. This organization wants more heavy, skilled, hard to play against forwards. So let's go pick by pick and talk some puck. Now, before we get into this whole pick by pick thing, guys, a couple of things that I want to get to, a little bit of housekeeping. Number one, I want to give another huge thank you to JDM CPA Incorporated and to JDM Prestige Memorabilia for sponsoring last night's live broadcast. 4 hours is not easy to do, and their support helped me do it. So thank you very much, Jimmy. I appreciate it very, very much. Also, I got to thank all of you out there who watched. Over 4,000 people tuned in to my broadcast, and I don't do drafts very often, so I was very humble in your belief in what I do. And I appreciate every single bit of positive comments that I got, not only in the chat, but after the fact. And I'm going to look at doing more live shows so that we can continue to talk to each other all summer long. So stay tuned for that as it's coming. Now, before we go pick by pick, I want to also frame the draft properly, right? Because the Canadiens came in, as I said, with three clear needs. They needed more help at center. They needed more right shot defensemen, and they needed to get the hell of a lot tougher, but with players that could play with size, skill, and pace. Not just big players and not just skilled players, but players who can eventually help win the harder games, those playoff style games that we saw the Canadiens struggle with, especially against the Carolina Hurricanes. Games where the space disappears, the forecheck gets heavier, and you need players who can win battles, protect pucks, move it cleanly, and make life really uncomfortable for the other team. And this draft class for the Canadiens tell you something about what they're trying to build. They went after size, they went after mobility, and they went after physicality. They added two right shot defensemen, they added multiple wingers with pace and edge, but they didn't address the center position. So the question after all of this is going to be very simple. Did the Canadiens come out of this draft stronger, or did they still leave one major hole untouched? So in saying that, let's take a look at the obvious first pick that we talked about a little bit last night, but we'll review again, and that is Gleb Pugachyov. I keep saying Ponyushkov. I don't know why. Pugachyov. There you go. Canadiens opened their draft by taking him at 26th overall. They traded up 2 spots to get him, so maybe, just maybe, they thought somebody might grab him. But he's got a very clear profile. You take a look at him, he's 6'3", 225. He's a big winger, heavy body, big physical power forward who plays with pace and force and brings the kind of frame Montreal doesn't have enough of in their forward group. And if you look very carefully, if you take his profile picture off the web and you draw in a mustache and put a little goatee on his chin, he looks eerily similar to one Arbor Jacki. But I digress. Maybe they're, distant cousins. I don't know, but they do look alike, especially with their frame. The scouting report on Gleb is very straightforward. He's a very heavy physical power forward who pressures defenders on the forecheck, wins battles along the wall, creates chaos around the net. He has a hard release, good hands in tight, and the frame to protect pucks and finish through contact. And that's the key phrase here, finish through contact. If you look up his highlight reels on YouTube, they're very impressive. But most highlight reels are, so I don't pay too much attention to that. Now, for the Canadiens' sake, they do have very skilled young forwards. They've got speed and they have offensive talent. But when you look at the next stage of what this rebuild has to be, they need more players who can impose themselves physically while still having enough skill to matter offensively. That's where Pugachyov really fits. The consensus ranking on him was generally that he would be in the late first, second round, early second round range. Some more public boards had him closer to the 20s. Others had him at 30 and 40 and even late 50s. Elite Prospects Consolidated Ranking had him around 35, while NHL Central Scouting had him really high amongst European skaters. So at 26, This wasn't some kind of wild swing. It was actually pretty aggressive, but defensible. The Canadiens are betting that the size, skating, and physical profile and goal scoring tools that Pugachyov has translate. Now, down the road, Pugachyov may help Montreal as a really heavy middle six winger who can play playoff hockey. Maybe he's not that pure top line offensive driver that everybody wants in the first round. But if the skill continues to develop, he looks like the type of winger who can play with skilled players, create space, win pucks, and make life miserable below the dots. And all those things matter, especially come playoff time. Because when you get into the playoffs, you need players who can survive contact and still create offense through traffic. Pugachyov gives them that kind of upside. So definitely a great pick as far as I'm concerned in that first round. Now, I know a lot of people wanted to see the Canadiens trade away the pick, but if there's no trade to be made, you might as well make do with the best that you can get. And Pugachyov at 26 was the best that the Canadiens could get. Next player we're going to look at in the second round, 57th overall, is Timofei Runtso. And no, I am not mispronouncing his name. It's Timofei, okay? This is one of the most important picks in this class because Runtso gives the Canadiens a right shot defenseman with size, mobility, and puck moving ability, and that checks a major box for Montreal. The scouting report on Runtso says he's a mobile right shot defenseman with strong puck moving habits and a mature two-way game. He transports the puck cleanly, activates off the blue line, and shows poise as a distributor in transition and on the power play. That's exactly the kind of player that Montreal needs more of. Right? You take a look at his numbers here on the screen, and you know what? They're relatively impressive in terms of ranking. And the Canadiens have David Reinbacher as an obvious top right shot defensive prospect. But after Reinbacher, the organizational depth falls off a cliff. So Runtso helps with that. He's not just a big body, he's a big body who can move pucks. He can start to break out, support transition, and he can activate offensively. And because he's 6'3", with a good long reach and mobility, there's a projectable defensive value if the details that he has continue to sharpen and he continues to develop. In terms of his ranking, Runtso was generally viewed as a second to third round prospect. That's where the Canadiens hit here. Some public lists had him around late 40s and 50s. Public lists even had him somewhere around 70s in some cases. And elite prospects had him around somewhere around 79. So at 57, it's a strong value area pick here. Not really a reach for Montreal and not a steal that you can declare today, but a smart needs-based pick that still lines up with the public range. Down the road, Runtso can help Montreal as a second pair or third pair puck-moving right shot defenseman if the development continues to hit. The power play element gives him a little bit more upside, but the real value is in this. Can he become a reliable transition defender on the right side? If yes, then the Canadiens nailed a valuable NHL piece, and for them, that's a really important addition. The funny part in those first two picks, by the way, is that in his press conference after the first round, Kent Hughes came out and said that Pugachyov was the best player available. I would be remiss to think that would absolutely be true, but he was the best player available with the skill set and size that Montreal was looking for, right? Addressing an organizational need. At a certain period of time, GMs have to stop lying to themselves and realize unless the guy's a generational player like a Gavin McKenna or an Ivar Stenberg, you're going to pick a player who not only has the right skill set, but he fits an organizational need. Because if you keep going out and getting the best player available and say, for example, they're all left wingers, well, guess what? You can't play hockey with all left wingers. Pretty simple concept. Now, in the third round, the Montreal Canadiens went out and grabbed Cooper Cleaves. Now, this one's not much of a surprise because Cleaves has been to the Canadiens development camp before as an invite. So with Cleaves, the Canadiens doubled down on right shot defense. And this is a different profile for what we saw in Runtso, right? Runtso was more of a puck-moving two-way defender. Cleaves is a little bit more competitive defensively. He's much more physical and activity-driven on the right side of the defense. The scouting report on Cleaves says he's a very strong competitive right shot D, whose best asset is his activity level. He closes quickly on rush defense, uses his reach and timing to disrupt entries, and will step into contact when lanes open up. That's pretty important because that's been a gap in the Canadiens' defense for the last couple of years at the very least. And the Canadiens don't just need right shot defensemen on paper. They need different kinds, right? So it's good that they have the balance between Runtso and Cleaves. They need someone who can defend, someone who can retrieve pucks, who can kill penalties and use length timing, and physicality to make life harder on the opposition. Cleaves fits that mold completely. His consensus ranking was more mixed. Public boards, which are hit and miss, by the way, had him anywhere between 98 and 166 among North American skaters, depending on the source that you find, with some lists even going lower. So at 73, Montreal's more likely took him earlier than the broader public consensus. That doesn't make the pick automatically bad, but it means the Canadiens like the projection for this kid, obviously, because they've seen him before. They like the tools, they like the fact that he's added more size since last year, and they like his competitiveness. And they probably saw a player who can mature into or into a defensive right shot blue liner with penalty killing value. Down the road, Cleaves helps because he becomes a reliable third pair right shot defender who can play hard minutes, defend rushes, clear bodies, and move the puck very simply. Not every defenseman needs to be a power play quarterback on the Montreal Canadiens. Sometimes the value is in ending plays, winning retrievals, and making the safe first pass, even being able to box out in the slot. And that lane is covered by Cleaves and his skill set. So I don't mind him. He's a physical defenseman, good defending, and he's good on the penalty kill. So plus, plus, plus for Montreal on the right side because they needed it. Now, with their next pick in the fourth round, the Montreal Canadiens went out and picked Brayden Klimpke from the Saskatoon Blades. Klimpke gives Montreal another mobile puck-moving defenseman, but he's a left shot. So he doesn't actually address the right shot need directly, but he does add another layer of skill and intelligence on the blue line for Montreal. The scouting report on Klimpke is he's a mobile left shot defenseman with strong puck moving instincts and calm decision making. He transports the puck cleanly, supports transition with smart outlets, and shows poise as a distributor from the blue line. And that's the key part of it, the calm decision making. Right? The Canadiens have prioritized defensemen who can move pucks, process quickly, and support transition. Klimpke actually fits that profile. His hockey IQ is up there over 80. So is his power play ability. You look at his defensive zone starts, offensive zone starts, his ability to move the puck is close to 90. So his profile is pretty strong. His production also stands out. 47 points in 68 WHL games from the blue line is very strong. And the jump from 26 points to 47 shows his offensive growth year over year. In terms of consensus ranking, Klimpke had a wide public range. Central Scouting had him 74th among North American skaters, while Elite Prospects had him somewhere around 119. And the Canadiens landed him right in the middle of that public range. So this isn't a pure upside gamble, but there's real substance here. His skating, transition, puck movement, and offensive awareness all are pluses for the Canadiens. The question is whether he can defend well enough at the next level, add a little bit more strength, and handle heavier pro pressure. Further down the road, as he develops, Klimpke can help as a depth puck-moving defenseman who can drive exits, support offense, and maybe become a third pair or call-up option with offensive utility. The Canadiens already have a lot of left shot defense depth, right? When you take a look up and down the lineup, you've got Hudson, you've got Gooley, Engstrom, Xhekaj, Struble, you name it. But good teams keep adding mobile defensemen, and Klimpke gives them another one on the blue line. Next up, of course, the fifth round, the Canadiens didn't have a pick, but we jumped to the sixth round. 189th overall, the Canadiens go out and pick up Parker Trottier from the U.S. Development Program in the USHL. Trottier is exactly the kind of sixth round pick that makes complete sense when you take a look at the grand scheme of things. He has pace, he can compete, he plays through contact, and he has a very direct game. The scouting report on Trottier is he's a fast, hard-driving winger who brings pace, contact, and strong competitive edge. He finishes checks, pressures defenders on the forecheck, and attacks inside ice with purpose. That's a bottom six NHL projection if it hits, and it's some offense too if that hits as well. His best offensive tool is his shot release. He may not have the hardest shot, but he can create offense off quick touches and direct routes. He's not being drafted as a high-end creator, but as a player who can bring energy, win pucks, pressure defenders, and chip in secondary scoring, which is something we know the Canadiens needed, especially as the playoffs got deeper. In terms of his ranking, he was around 189, right? That's real value. He was 79th among North American skaters on Central Scouting's list. Schmath Hockey had him around 80, Elite Prospects around 110. Hockey News at 115 and McKeen's at 183. So for Montreal to get him at 189, that's a very reasonable swing. The Canadiens are betting on motor. And in the later rounds, That's often the smart bet because you're not going to find as much skill as you'd like in the 6th and 7th round, obviously. As his path progresses, Trottier can help as a fourth line energy winger who pressures the puck, finishes checks, kills momentum, and makes the opponent work for every single breakout. It may not sound very flashy, but every playoff team needs those players. If he can add a little bit more offense, he becomes a very useful depth piece, maybe even third line material. Also in the 6th round, just one pick later at 190, the Canadiens picked up Wesley Royston. Royston, who spent last year with the Owen Sound Attack, is a classic tools bet for Montreal. He's got size, speed, physical edge, plays right wing. He's 6'4". He's got an explosive straight line game, and is the kind of player you take in the 6th round because the package is rare, even if the production is not where you'd like it to be. The scouting report on Royston is he's a big explosive winger who combines straight line speed, heavy forecheck, and really physical edge. He attacks off the rush, drives into contact, and can separate defenders with his stride. To me, that's very appealing if he's got that type of pull away speed. But the key phrase is this: when he stays engaged. And that's where there's going to be a little bit of a development challenge for Montreal. If Royston learns and translates into playing a consistent game with intensity, there's a real NHL projection for him. If he becomes more passive, the production may not be enough to really carry him. Consensus ranking on him was all over the map. Central Scouting had him around the 80s for North American skaters, and McKeen's had him a hell of a lot later. Public Evaluation saw him somewhere between the 4th and 6th round because of the size and skating combination. At 190, I like this bet for Montreal because in the 6th round, you're not looking for the perfect player. You're looking for tools that can become something. And given the way the Montreal Canadiens have been able to develop players in their system of late, I'm okay with this pick. Royston can help Montreal down the road as a bottom 6 power forward who brings speed, pressure, and net front presence. If the skill package keeps developing and he remains consistent and engaged, there's going to be even more upside. But even if he tops out as a hard skating, physical depth winger, that still fits what Montreal is trying to build. So, thumbs up for Royston. Now, in the 7th round, the Canadiens went local. And in my case, I mean really local, because they drafted Jeam-Samuel Daigneault from the Muskogee Lumberjacks. The fun part about him is that Daigneault is from Saint Michel, Quebec, where I played a lot of my hockey when I was younger. So pretty cool. Daigneault gives the Canadiens a local physical shutdown style defense prospect. Okay, he's a a left shot defenseman. So another guy who adds to the left side of the D, but that's fine. The scouting report on Daigneault is he's a rangy left shot defenseman who brings mobility, strong gap control, and a hard physical edge. He closes quickly, finishes checks, and makes life difficult around the net and along the wall. That tells you what the Montreal Canadiens are chasing right here. They're not looking for offense. They're not looking for power play production. They're not looking for high-end puck skill. They're chasing a defensive identity: length, mobility, gap control, physicality, and penalty killing value. Daigneault's puck game is described as simple but efficient. Clean retrievals, responsible first passes, but not high-end offensive profile by any stretch. And that's fine for a 7th round pick. In terms of the public ranking, elite prospects had him around 135, but there wasn't a huge amount of public consensus around him like there was with some of the earlier picks, right? At 221, this is a worthwhile late swing, especially given the defensive defenseman who can skate, close gaps, and play with physical bite. That always has development value. That's never a loss on anybody. Down the road, maybe Daigneault can help Montreal if he becomes a bottom pair shutdown defender, penalty killer, or organizational depth who plays hard and plays a pro-style defensive game. He's still going to need time, but the identity in his game is extremely clear. And with the final pick of the NHL draft for the Canadiens, and I mean final because they had the last pick in the draft in the 7th round, 224 overall, they picked up Tyler Deakos. Deakos is from Canmore, Alberta. You take a look at his profile, it doesn't scream anything crazy, right? But he was the last pick in the draft. And anytime you take the last pick, it's the purest swing, in your draft class. Public consensus was completely limited on Deakos, right? There wasn't much information out there about him because he wasn't publicly scouted by a lot of major agencies. So the Canadiens needed to trust their internal work here when it comes to this kid. So the scouting report on this card is very interesting, right? Deakos is described as a fast, skilled right winger whose game is driven by elite skating, edge control, and strong puck skill. He attacks with pace, creates off the rush, and uses deception to open passing and shooting lanes. That's a complete skill profile. And when you're picking at 224, that's kind of what you want. You take something with a clear tool. In this case, those tools are skating, edge control, puck skill, and offensive creativity. The production is also worth noting, right? 15 goals and 32 points in 29 total games between Drumheller and Waterloo isn't nothing. It's pretty impressive. And now the jump to the higher levels will be the real test because next year, as you can see here, that side, always, he's going to be playing in the Western Hockey League with the Penticton Vs. And the Vs have a very stringent style of play. But as a 7th round pick, Deakos gives Montreal a skill-driven winger with enough size and enough offensive trait to justify the gamble. Maybe he helps down the road if his skating and deception continue to translate as maybe a middle 6 winger. And that's an upside for Montreal. The floor is obviously uncertain for him, but with the final pick, you always chase upside. And that's what Montreal did here. So now, let's take a look at the overall draft assessment for Montreal, and we'll bring it all back to all those 3 needs that Montreal needed. Number 1 was obviously they needed centers. That's a complete miss for Montreal. They didn't draft a single center in this class. So, and that matters because center remains one of the most difficult positions to fill. You find wingers later, you can develop depth defensemen, but a legitimate NHL center is hard to acquire, hard to draft, and expensive to trade for. Now, that's not to say that at 28, you're going to find a center who's going to translate to anything. So the fact that Montreal didn't draft a center didn't surprise me. I would have liked to have seen them pick Hextall, who went 4 picks later. But beggars can't be choosers. They drafted for organizational need, and I have no problem with that. In fact, I prefer it. But if we're judging this draft strictly against the center need, Montreal didn't solve a damn thing. Now, to be fair, as I said, you're not going to force a center just to say you drafted one, right? If the board just isn't there, the board's not there. But the result is still the result. The Canadiens leave the draft still needing more answers down the middle. That means the pressure remains on the existing prospect pool, the trade market, and player development. So in terms of center in this draft and addressing that need, the Canadiens get a D. I would have given him an F, but D is as low as I'm going to go here. Not because every pick was bad, right? But because the need wasn't addressed. So in terms of that, they get a D. Second, right-handed defense. And this is where the Canadiens did extremely well. Timofei Runtso in the 2nd round, Cooper Cleaves in the 3rd. 2 right-shot D, both 6'3", both of them with extremely different profiles. Runtso gives you a puck-moving transition, offensive poise, and two-way upside, while Cleaves gives you length, activity, rush defense, physicality, and penalty-killing projection. Getting 2 guys like that, the yin and yang on the right side, that's good drafting. Because the Canadiens didn't just add 1 right-shot defenseman and move on. They added 2, and they added 2 different versions to boot. If Runtso becomes a puck-moving option and Cleaves becomes a defensive stopper, that gives the organization a much-needed balance behind Reinbacher. Right-hand defensive grade, total A- for Montreal here, because this was the cleanest strategic win in this draft for Montreal. The 3rd need, depth skill combined with toughness. This is the theme of this class. Pugachyov, power-heavy winger with offensive upside. Trottier, pace, contact, forecheck, and energy. Royston, size, speed, and a power game. Daigneault, shutdown edge and physical defending. Deakos, late-round skating and skill swing. So even Klimpke and Cleaves fit the broader identity because they both bring mobility and competitiveness from the back end. And the Canadiens clearly wanted to get harder to play against, right? So, but they didn't just want to get bigger for the sake of getting bigger. They targeted players who have at least one standout translatable tool. For Pugachyov, it's size and power. Runtso has puck movement. Cleaves has defensive activity, Klimpke, skating and transition. Trottier has a motor. Royston has size and speed. Daigneault has physical shutdown value, and Deakos, skating and puck skill. That's a good mix of players. Depth, skill, and toughness grade, another A- here for Montreal. This class adds the type of players who can make the Canadiens deeper, heavier, and more difficult to play against 3, 4, and 5 years from now. My final verdict, the overall assessment, the Canadiens didn't solve the center problem. That remains the biggest hole. And if this team is serious about taking the next step, that position still needs to be addressed. Probably going to be addressed via either free agency by some fluke, because the market's very thin, or via trade. But they did a very strong job attacking the right side of their defense. They added the physicality they needed. They added size and pace. And they added several players who project as difficult playoff-style opponents if their development hits. And that's the case with any kid that you draft. Unless, of course, he's Gavin McKenna, if the development hits. It's by no stretch a flashy draft class from top to bottom. It's not loaded with pure offensive star power, but it's a very clear identity draft. Heavy winger, right shot defense, more mobility on the blue line, more forecheck pressure, a lot more physical bite, and more late round tools. The key player, of course, in the draft is Pugachyov, right? If he becomes a legitimate middle six power forward, this draft looks a hell of a lot better. The key need pick, though, is Runtso. If he becomes a real NHL right shot puck moving defenseman, that's a major hole filled by the Montreal Canadiens. The key value swing may be Trottier or Royston. If either one of them becomes a bottom six winger with pace and bite, that's a win. And the key criticism is obvious. No centers. No centers. So my final grade, I'm giving them a B-, and that's pretty, B+, and that's pretty good for this draft. Strong identity, strong right shot defensive work, good blend of skill and toughness, but incomplete because the center need is still sitting there. And for the Canadiens, that's no small detail. It's their next big move. So now it's time for me to hear from you. And be honest, did the Canadiens nail this draft by adding size, right shot defense, and playoff style depth? Or did they make a major mistake by walking away without drafting a single center? Drop your grade in the comments. A, B, C, or worse. And tell me which pick let me say that again. Tell me which pick you think has the best chance to become a real NHL player. Pugachyov, Runtso, Trottier, or one of the late round swings. Because this class may not be flashy today, but 3 years from now, we may look back as it's a major identity draft for the Montreal Canadiens. So as usual, I'll ask you guys, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and let's keep building the smartest Habs community on YouTube. As always, keep your skates down, stick on the ice, go Habs go.